And so as we enter in this amazing panel, and my sister here, who I've been seeing on Zoom for a while, Dr. Jada Brooks, will be leading this beautiful panel. She's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Nursing. So everyone, how do you do a warm applause? And fan yourself. Yep, warm applause. There you go. Okay, over to you guys. And put your questions in pigeonhole, please.
Tanake, Tiana Iedu, Niat, Jada Brooks. Hi, greetings. I'm from North Carolina, as was mentioned, and I am an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe, and they're also known as people of the Dark Water. This is my first time attending the conference. I was invited by Dr. Bluebird Jernigan. Last year when I was in Minnesota, I was a part of the Promoting Indigenous Research Leadership program and met Dr. Bluebird Jernigan there, and she recommended that I serve on this panel, or invited me to serve on this, the planning committee, and it was such an honor just to be able to be among folks that I had no connection with, but immediately felt welcomed and invited. And I must admit that before I came, I had this false assumption that I really don't know if there will be anything in common between my work and the work that is being presented here. But that was, again, a false assumption. And from the presenters that just spoke, there are so many elements of my work that align with what was presented. I study health disparities among American Indians in southeastern North Carolina. I use community-based participatory research and community-engaged approaches in my research. And I also, your work spoke to the mind-body connection, and again, elements of my work also focus on that. So I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and have the pleasure of moderating. And we do have about 32 minutes, I believe, for
Their ability to express what they were thinking and what they were doing would have been very limited, and our worldviews were systematically dismantled by colonialist, genocidal policies. So we're talking about what was able to survive and resist colonization,
the top
boarding
question
schools, etc.
that arose is to please describe any benefits of sourcing regional, localized foods to ensure maximized phytonutrients, antioxidant potential. Superfoods shipped across the world may not be super.
I agree. A basic, simple thumb rule is to first, irrespective of the phytochemical richness, just increase your daily serving from the current average 1 to 5 to eventually a healthy 7 to 10. And then the more diversity you can bring in from local food system, from all this research we have seen, and in Denmark, where there is a lot of regional food, and in some parts of Europe, there's a lot of regional food systems in the local, the phytochemical nutrients enrich, they are automatically enriched. So the first thumb rule is to increase your high fiber and servings per day. And then within that, you see how locally grown elements with local scientific, then we can do all these analysis within that. But that's the first step, is to just increase the servings and build the regional food. I have more what we call the weekly, local markets. More of that. We did this in Springfield, Massachusetts, when I was at the University of Massachusetts. We worked through the church. First, it was only a Sunday after church service. But within a few weeks, we had it on a Wednesday. So slowly, and then what we try to do is, for example, in Hadley, Massachusetts, they have pumpkins and all of these. They only sell the top 10%. And then they have a little edge, they dispose it. So we try to work through the church to make these food baskets for these little damage, but they're food, considering our food safety issues. And then we distribute it through Sunday service. So increase more of such things. So there's a lot of local ways in which we can improve the phytonutrient density, both from a general point of view, but both specialized growing too. Like maybe we get this special getty squash, right? More. Right.
Have to be creative, have creative approaches.
Sorry. Yeah.
I would also add that a lot of our superfoods are local. One of the things that was shared at our conference was that, especially in Alaska, a lot of the plants have to deal with cold and adverse conditions, and that increases the phytonutrients available within them because they need those chemicals in order to combat the harsh environment. So the harsher the environment, the more nutritionally dense they are. And that's also true for plant medicines. So the cottonwood buds and things like that, they're developing these chemicals within them to help protect them from viruses and bacteria and funguses. And again, the more adverse conditions they have to resist, the more medicinal components they have that we can then utilize for our skin or internally or things like that.
Oh, that's excellent. We use those tools in our research as well. That's
Very interesting. It reminds me of the opening ceremony that when we spoke about or heard about how water is a part of who we are, and it reminds me that the foods are also a part of who we are, and that their resilience leads to our resilience, and we've experienced similar conditions, and we're also resilient people, not only in our personal day-to-day experience, but also through the foods that we eat, and that's very interesting how those things relate. So the next question is for Dr. Maunakea. Can we use cell methylation as a way to tell who might get diabetes and then focus our efforts on prevention instead of treating the disease after diagnosis?
Yes, we can. Actually, thank you so much for that question. So the data that I shared today actually were taken from individuals who weren't diabetic at the time, but we actually start to see emerging patterns of methylation that already appear before the manifestation of the clinical symptoms of the disease. So we think that there are certain sites in the epigenome of especially these inflammatory cells that might be actually indicating that predisposition towards that development. And actually, we're going to be validating whether or not we can use those sites to predict the onset of diabetes in this new cohort study that I just briefly mentioned in the talk. So the goal actually is to identify new biomarkers, epigenetic biomarkers, who detect how early someone's on that trajectory before the manifestation of that disease to enable preventative modalities and interventions. Especially, and that's particularly important to do in order from a population that's already at a higher risk for these conditions. So we really need to get at that individual level and be able to identify these early indicators, which we hope will enable prevention, which I think is one huge step forward into addressing and eliminating health disparities in these populations. So thank you.
And the next question we have is for Kyle. Are you able to utilize data sharing within your work?
Yes, in general, we can. The Southcentral Foundation, where I work, takes a very strong stance on data sovereignty. So Alaskan data stays within Alaska. There needs to be a very good reason for sharing the data. Our particular project didn't really do systematic or generalizable data collection, but we did collect evaluation data, so pre and post surveys. What do you know about traditional foods? How comfortable do you feel harvesting traditional foods? Do you integrate it into your daily life? And then at the end of the workshop, we also did a post survey. What are your attitudes on traditional foods now that you've had 2 days to learn about them? How confident are you to go out and collect traditional foods? Do you intend to use more traditional foods in your diet? And we do have a data use agreement that we're sharing with the CHE partners. So again, CHE was set up with Oklahoma State University being the backbone organization and 4 satellite centers, 2 in Alaska and 2 in Oklahoma. So we do have a data use agreement to share our evaluation data with the backbone organization. And if you're interested in accessing our data, we can probably send me an email and we can talk to our managers and supervisors about setting something up.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have is, it's an anonymous question from an anonymous person, and maybe from the audience. I'm assuming that this question, any three of you could respond to this question. As a researcher, I see a general mistrust of research institutions by BIPOC populations. How do you increase interest to have more representation in trials?
That's for sure in our community. There's a general mistrust of institutions like universities to go into communities to harvest or extract information. I think being here today and being from our community actually addresses part of that issue. I think we need more people like us in our communities and work together to build data for our communities and work in partnership directly with them. I think that's one way to move that ahead. The other way that we work with our communities in partnerships is we try to embed sort of this education for science within the culture of our community. So I kind of hinted on that in the models that I shared. It's actually knowledge from our community. So the data that we're collecting actually is generated for our community going back into that community. And that takes a relationship with those community partners over time. And we have certain policies and practices in place at the university level that allow us to share data, to give back information to community partners, and in a way that they can actually use that information, understand that information. So it's not just data that we're gonna be sending off to our paper or you can only find in this obscure report that the community can never find or understand, but it's actually relating to them what this information might mean for them and that community and building that capacity for the community to be able to use that information to address some of the health needs. So one example is what Matt mentioned the other day with Mānoa Organic Farms is actually, in addition to recruiting participants for the study to look at the gut microbiome and epigenetic interactions in those individuals that are on the farm, we actually returned that information back to the participants in a secure data dashboard system where each individual participant had their own results back to them that they can view and visualize in the context of the larger aggregated data on that platform. And in addition to that information, actually, the data that was used, actually, before even we published that information, that data was used by that organization to improve and optimize their programming, as well as to secure other funding. So it's actually really valuable information, not just for the researchers, but also for the community. So this sort of reciprocal relationship with our community is super important, and it's all value-based. And I very much believe in the concept that we really need, as researchers, to actually be in community with that kind of relationship moving forward. So it really does play a major role and have benefits that's not just one-sided. So thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to echo what I just heard. So there's been a history of research misconduct in Alaska Native and American Indian communities. There's a very famous case in Alaska called the Barrow Alcohol Study, where the community of Barrow, now called Utqiagvik, invited in researchers to help them understand the struggles that they were having with alcohol. The researchers came in, conducted their studies, and all of a sudden, people in Barrow were opening up their newspaper, and the New York Times was publishing a story on the research before it had even been shared back with the community, where the researchers were saying, this is a dying community. They're not going to survive it was tremendously negatively framed, and they were just heartbroken that these researchers wouldn't even approach their community and share these findings with them before they blasted it out on the New York Times. There was a radioactive iodine study conducted in interior Alaska, where Alaska Natives were told this is routine medical care, but in fact it was an experimental treatment for thyroid disorder. They didn't find out until well after the fact. There was a tuberculosis vaccine that was tested out, again, experimentally on Alaska Natives. And that was administered, I think, in like the 30s and 40s. And they followed that population for like 50 years. In the 1990s, people started getting these letters saying, thank you for participating in this tuberculosis vaccine. And they're like, study, and they're like, wait, I was a what? And it took them, and they had no idea that they'd been administered an experimental vaccine that was experimenting not only on the type of vaccine that was administered, but on the needles that were used, the gauge of needles. It was completely experimental, completely there was no informed consent, there was no debriefing, there was no understanding that you could decline participation. So without understanding why we're reticent to join research studies, it's hard to see how you can overcome that hesitancy. And so that's part of the idea behind beneficence, that you are going to benefit from this research. And I think, again, the idea that was just presented, that you need to be involved in the community. Ideally, it needs to be tribally led research. It needs to be based in the community. We need to see people. Thank you. We need more Indigenous researchers. I'm an anthropologist. Anthropology has a very storied history with Alaska Native communities and American Indian communities, but being a member of that community, I can understand that history and that relationship and that dynamic. I can approach them, in their language. I can at least introduce myself. Again, I don't speak Tlingit fluently, but I can introduce myself in my language. And even if I'm operating in the Yupik region, this happened recently, I introduced myself in Tlingit, which is not their language, but they're like, I went to school with Tlingit people, and I recognize the connection you have to your culture, and that gives me more confidence that you know how to conduct this research sensitively and with an awareness of Alaska Native values, because even though we're distinct and different, we do share a lot of core values with each other. Yeah, I think there's something else I was going to say, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I agree. So I've been in this country 40 years now. And my first experience was when I came to Idaho, fishing. I had a native person next to me. So he said, "Are you Indian?" I said, "Yeah." And so there was a connection right away. This is my first year in 1994. But beyond that, there was an empathetic connection. But what I do now is I visit the community 6-7 times, not just before a grant or something, but keep engaging them. I go even the previous day and sit with the elders, listen to the elders over dinner. And then second is students. So a PhD student from the Indigenous community, but also now our new master's, Mercedes, she's going to join me. So I make a deliberate effort to bring more Indigenous students into my program to address these challenges. So they can better guide me both directly, but also better give me reflections and to engage with the community at their terms.
Thank you for those responses. I'm really happy to hear about how community is central in this work and needs to be central. It reminds me of an interaction that I had yesterday with Manuela Maldonado Rosebud. I was visiting one of the tables outside, one of the vendors, and we started talking about where she was from, and she mentioned that she was involved in the Strong Heart study, and it was sort of an unexpected, conversation that arose around that, and how she was involved in going out and talking with the participants. And just so happens, I did a second year analysis on data from the Strong Heart study. And so it really just reminded me that we're all connected in some way. And I was happy to hear that the Strong Heart study is partnering with the community in that way, and have trusted members from the community to go out and to talk with the participants and to keep them engaged in this work. And she shared about the value of this work and how it has implications for future generations. And it's really important that we keep community central in this work. This, I think, might apply to Alika. How might we share the knowledge about epigenetics and traditional foods to empower individuals?
That's a great question. I think it starts with young folks, sharing it with our community through our keiki, our children. I mean, I did that with my keiki, my little one who's now 18 years old. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm that old. But taught her from a really early age how that's super important for not only her own health, but it actually affects her cells, and she actually understood all of that. She can actually recite photosynthesis and all of that when she was like 3 or 4. So kind of shocking for her friends around her. But I think it really starts there, connecting our young folks to this information and actually connecting them through our cultural practices as well. So my kupuna, like that's how she exposed me to this field of how environment affects health in very pragmatic, very practical ways that she did that. I think we have the ability to do that. We can share that information through our Keiki and also learn ourselves. We have a lot of partnerships with schools and the teachers that then can relate that information to students that they take it home to their family members. So I think that's one very beneficial way to kind of relate this information back out to the community. It's essential information, it's fundamental. I think, you know, the other aspects I like to do is like share the research, right? So spread that around, have a conversation about it at the dinner table. I mean, I think those things, some other ways you can think about of sharing this knowledge. One of the sort of things that kind of set me off on this track of epigenetics, like I mentioned, it sort of fell into this field, is that it started at my home, in my hometown, just realizing the impacts that, you know, are built and sort of natural environments have on our health. And I just wanted to explore that more. So I was just curious about that. So just stoke that curiosity. I think one of the previous speakers yesterday said, you know, spark that fire. There are fire keepers in our communities. So just spark that interest in our youth. I think that's a very effective way to share that information and spread it in our community. So thank you.
And I would also add, just continuing to communicate the health benefits of traditional foods. It wasn't that long ago that in Alaska, health practitioners were telling folks, don't eat seal oil, you know, gut seal oil. You know, don't eat our traditional foods because it's high in fat, and fat is bad. Well, not all fats are equal, and seal oil in particular is extremely high in omega-3 fatty acids. It's one of the primary ways that we used to get vitamin D. I think it's seal oil in our diets. Again, Alaska, not a whole lot of sunlight. Even in the summer when we get sun, it's not very easy to absorb vitamin D because of the way the rays hit the atmosphere. So we got most of our vitamin D through our diet. And if you're telling folks don't eat traditional foods, we're not getting access to those vital micronutrients. And so the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, again, our sister organization who helps co-manage the Alaska Native Medical Center, the largest Native hospital in Alaska, their cancer department put together that traditional food guide that I mentioned in my presentation, which lays out the health benefits of traditional foods, the recipes, how to harvest the plants and things like that, plants and animals in our region. Because a lot of us from Anchorage, a lot of Alaska Natives who live in Anchorage, we're not from there. I'm not from there. I grew up in Southeast Alaska, 800 miles away. I don't know where the berries are. I don't know where how to harvest the animals and things like that. So the guide helps you position yourself within that local environment and context, and how to prepare and preserve these foods. But it was also a way to communicate to the healthcare providers, these are healthy foods. You need to be advocating that people who are going through cancer and cancer survivors are eating their traditional foods because it makes them healthier. And so that's a way to empower people to eat their traditional foods, is just tell them it's good for you. It's food that has helped us survive for 10,000 years in these environments. You know, there's demonstrable history in Alaska. I was just telling somebody, there's a village called Nikolsky in the Aleutian Chain. I was going to show you earlier. Here's the hand map of Alaska. So out here is the Aleutian Chain. Nikolsky has been continuously inhabited for 6,000 years. People have been living in that one village. Colonialism has strongly reduced their population. They're now just less than 100 people, I think. But they've been living in that one cove for 6,000 years. That's an extreme testament to the success of their lifestyle. You know, these are foods and ways of life that can sustain us through thousands of years. There's a basket that was found in a mud flat in Southeast Alaska, where I'm from, way down here. And they could tell by how the basket was designed, or how it was started in the bottom. Each tribe in our region has a different way of starting a basket. They could tell it was a Tlingit basket, and when they did carbon dating on it, it was 8,000 years old. We've been making that same type of basket for 8,000 years. Our cultures are incredibly well developed. They're incredibly sophisticated. We have incredible tool sets and skill sets for adapting to our environments and living in our places. And that's a message that we can communicate to people. These are rich and vital ways of living and looking at the world.
The next question is related to a topic that's receiving a lot of attention in the biomedical research field. How does being mixed race affect the outcome of a traditional diet and health model? And do particular races affect health outcomes more than the other races that make up a person?
I think there's two different questions, really. So I'll handle the last part first. Particular races affect health outcomes more than other races. Yes, I think what some of our data that we're seeing with epigenetics, diabetes is clinically diagnosed disorder. It's based on a very specific parameter that apparently applies to everyone, right? Which is very specific glycemic control indicators that can influences or underlies a diagnosis for diabetes, type 2 diabetes. But I think biologically, different ethnic and racial groups experience diabetes differently. So I think our data is sort of hinting towards this pathway where Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders actually experience diabetes differently than the other two populations that I mentioned, where inflammation seems to be playing a major role in its progression, whereas in other populations, such as whites and maybe even Japanese Americans, inflammation is not maybe a driver of that condition. It could be other things, such as pancreatic dysfunction, for example. So I think, yes, different ethnic groups experience the same clinical diagnosed outcomes differently at the physiologic cell level. First question, how does mixed race affect outcome of a traditional diet and health model? Okay, that's a really complicated question, but I think thinking back on what Kyle mentioned already about traditional diets, and I have this interesting hypothesis that I think Native peoples sort of adapted epigenetically to a specific homeostatic relationship with their ecology that includes traditional foods. And so, we never had a word for diabetes in Native Hawaiian culture before it started appearing. We call it mimikoko. The La'olapa'o practitioners I mentioned had to invent this new term for this disease. Mimikoko means sweet blood, which is basically the phenotype of diabetes. Our food systems, our sort of ecology, our interaction with it, made us resilient against these chronic disorders. And I think displacement from that, or the separation, removal, disruption of that ecology is a contributing factor to what you see in these chronic conditions. So I do think that we can use that information to return back to those traditional foods because our epigenomes already sort of primed for that relationship. And we've heard that already throughout the different talks out there. Even your palate we have to get our palates used to our traditional foods because I think we're epigenetically adapted to that homeostatic relationship with our traditional foods that makes us resilient. And that's, I think, what's happening and what we're starting to glean from our data. And now the question of how mixed race affects the outcome and how that's going to be really interesting to understand because there's a lot of levels of admixture, epigenetic variability, genetic variability, environmental factors that are different between different populations that are having a major effect on health outcomes. I think much more so than just the genetics itself and the variability at the genetic level. So I think it's still unclear to what degree mixed race will have an effect on traditional diets and those health outcomes. But I think there are some fundamental things that are really relevant to everyone.
Yeah, for me, it's that mixed race is very personal because I now have 2 grandchildren who are half Indian, half Japanese. Mm-hmm. And that's really very, of course, there's some common threads of 2 cultures. But I've been talking to my daughter-in-law and son. Diversity. That means they adapt to diversity of food of both cultures, and at the home, and so that diversity is key with the same logic that I presented And plus, of course, Japanese, you have more seafood, and from India, you have a variety of herbs and spices. So they're already tasting both sides. More sour-based Japanese and more spice-based. So I think the more wider adaptation to the diversity of foods would better insulate us.
I really wanted this question to pop up. It's something I think we can all relate to. It reminds me of the peptide hormone ghrelin, and I think for me, I always think about turning into a gremlin when I get hangry. So this is a question that I'm interested in hearing more about. I keep hearing conflicting information about fasting. I would like to know more. I get hangry. How can fasting help me?
See, I'm sort of involved with that. I've sort of looked at comparative culture across the world. And then if you sort of synergize, a simplest, easy way is have your regular 3 meals, however you eat it, but at least give yourself 14-hour fast meals. Eating at 6 is a good thing, and then the breakfast at 8. So that could be the easiest way to start. And then there are different data that's coming, whether you do this on a daily basis and suddenly once a week, you could do an 18-hour fast. So that means don't break your normal type of eating that you already have and suddenly switch to something drastic. But if you sort of consistently go on a daily, 14-hour, have your 3 meals, 8 to 6. So that's how I'm approaching it both in India, some of my Indian projects, and also Bali and in other places. And then once a week, they go to a 12 to 8. And sometimes once a month, some of them like a 24-hour breakfast, and then a 24-hour. So it depends, and you need an endocrinologist and a doctor with you to sort of put that into sort of, but at a simple level, a 14-hour would be easiest way, meaning you have your regular breakfast, lunch, dinner, but finish it before 6. And so in India, it's terrible because they eat by 9 o'clock. And that's terrible. And so it's one of the fastest growing diabetes country in the world. And some of it is linked to that from what I'm hearing from the endocrinologists.
Can you share a little bit more about the benefits at the cellular and molecular level?
Oh, great. Yeah. There was a science article recently. But in general, the inflammatory control, glycemic control, starting with glycemic control, can be managed much better. Then impact on inflammatory markers is also better. It's given a rest. So many of these metabolic steps that I've talked about, glycemic control, vascular health, then onward towards core inflammation, all of this can be tamped down with that fasting cycle. About a year ago, there's a beautiful article in Science magazine that summarizes all of this. And I could send you that link so that I can share it. That's a very nicely written article. And it's.
There are also, apps, because I know a little bit about fasting and the benefits of fasting, and there are apps as well to help sort of time and there are different, as you mentioned, 14, 18, some of the more drastic periods of fasting, but I think starting out with what you can handle and allowing your body to adjust and it to become tolerable so you don't get hangry, that's something that takes time, but there are certainly benefits to fasting. We really appreciate all the wonderful questions that we had for this panel. I don't know if there are any closing comments that any of you would like to share.
Just thank you so much for the opportunity for us to be here. Mahalo.
Goodness, geez, thank you for having us.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here. And I've been here, this is my 5th of the 8. This by far the best. And yesterday was the highlight, the chef's evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the dialogue.